Hello storytellers, I'm writer and artist Lex Slank, and this is Creator's Cut, where I detail my continuing journey towards publication and more. In today's episode, I will be talking about my current project and some of the challenges I've encountered with it and things that I've learned, and just how it's shaped my writing and my creative process and my creative journey up until now. Hold on to your coffee, kids. It's about to get interesting. So my current project is a series of books that are all interconnected, fantasy series, kind of like a Marvel Cinematic Universe, but in book form. But it didn't start out that way. If you watched the first episode of Creator's Cut, you will know that I originally self-published my various books and work. When I was 19, I started and continued to publish for quite some years. And the book that actually started this series was one of those titles that I published back in the day. It was my, I think, fourth or fifth release that I had. And as I explained last video, I released novels and short stories and different things as I self-published. But this was originally a novella. So, not quite a novel, not quite a short story. It was the first project that I had done of this kind. You can laugh, it's okay. I have always liked, vampire stories. So I remember watching a version of Dracula when I was very, very little. I'm probably like 3 years old. It was a classic, film, not the Bela Lugosi one, but one of the others. I don't even actually know which one it was, but I remember watching it on TV and just like being fascinated with this character that was just so, composed and powerful and just interesting. So ever since then, I've really liked vampire stories. I find them interesting, and there's so many things that you can do in that particular story realm, and I love fantasy in general. But that's always been a sticking point for me. I remember even, reading Twilight when it came out. Well, years after it came out. I didn't get on the bandwagon initially, but, I remember reading it when it came out, and just other series and stories and movies. I've just always liked the vampire genre, if you will, because I kind of consider it a genre. There's enough books that I think it could be its own thing. But I, at that time, ended up writing a vampire book, the novella, as I said, and it was the first time I had written anything like that, and it wasn't over the top or anything. It actually was more of like an urban fantasy and a little bit of, like the city background and, the just different things. And I had a lot of fun writing that. I kind of came up with it like sort of not really on the spot, but it was, inspired by some like dreams I had and just like different stories I had liked, prior to that. And I just wanted to try something different. This was when I was starting to struggle with, publishing and kind of getting frustrated and depressed and very stressed and anxious about, just publishing things quickly and just having so much going on. There was a lot of pressure, so I think this particular story was sort of a home for me at the time, because I was, struggling writing these other things, and so like this was new and different, but it was something that, like a genre that I really, really liked, that I just hadn't been able to really do anything with yet, and kind of a story that had been in the back of my mind for a very long time, and so it was, a pressure relief at the time. And I published, the first version of it, and it wasn't really like exactly what I wanted, but I was thinking like, oh, okay, I can put this out as a series. It'll just be like a few books about these characters, and then I'll move on, kind of thing. Well, when I started having trouble with writing, I ended up pulling the book from the proverbial shelf. And, at the time I kind of just put it in my, on my shelf in my back lot kind of thing to use, later on maybe, and come back to it. I knew I wanted to rewrite it because it was very obvious to me shortly after I wrote and published the story that it wasn't exactly what it needed to be. I kind of wrote it through therapy to some degree, and it wasn't that it was bad necessarily. I try not to look on my previous work as bad, even though it's definitely not to the par that I would write now. It's not as good as I would write now. I can say it's my work. I can say it. But of course, writing is like anything else. You grow better as you do it more, and as you learn more about the craft and how to say things and what you want to say. So I really try not to look back on my prior work, as this is just bad and like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. I try not to do that, even though it's not how I would do things now. Very, very different from how I would do things now. I still try to be proud of myself for the previous work that I put out, and putting myself out there and challenging myself to write and to do things with different stories. I think even though it's not what I would do now and to the par I would do now, I'm still very proud of it. I'm proud of myself for finishing things and getting them done and trying them out. But this particular story, I'm mostly proud of myself for taking down after I published it, and just because it wasn't exactly what it needed to be. I just had that sense that no, there's more to this story. I'm just not capable of writing it how it needs to be written as of yet. And that was a big lesson for me to learn as an artist, as a writer, that there are just, there's always going to be particular, not just challenges, but particular projects that you want to work on, ideas that you have that are really great, but it is a skill to learn to know when you're capable of actually working on them. And I think, there's a lot of work that goes into becoming better at any job. And, writing particularly, I go by the 20,000, hour rule. It takes 20,000 hours to become a, master of something. And I think for writing, particularly because that's mostly what I do at this point, I think that's very, very true. You're never going to be perfect at something in general, but, becoming a master of something or becoming really good at something takes time. And so that was a lesson I had to learn with that particular book. It wasn't terrible when I wrote it, but it just wasn't what it needed to be because I wasn't where I needed to be able to write it correctly, to be able to, really adhere to the vision that I had for it, and really figure out what the story was trying to say. Because every story has something to say, even if it's a silly story, or if you just write it just for fun and you're just thinking, oh, it's it's just something, a side project, it's not really deep or anything. It still has something to say. Every story has something to say. Everything that we do has something to say. So I had to set that story aside, and I'm proud of myself for doing that, even though at the time I was thinking, oh, I already published this and then I'm pulling it down. Is that okay? It was what I needed to do, and where I was at. So that story actually sat on the shelf for quite some time, and I just kept thinking like, oh yeah, I'm eventually going to pick it up and write those 3 books. I think I had it in mind as being a trilogy, and I figured, well, I'll make it longer, so it'll be novels, instead of novellas, and then I'll be able to, move forward from there and again, do something different. I didn't really think, it would become anything other than that. Fast forward years later, about 9 years ago now, I actually had another idea. I had, this dream about this. This is kind of funny, but it was actually, I think, like basically like a Harry Potter fan fiction dream. I honestly don't even remember what the story in the dream was, other than it had to do with these 2 siblings, and I think various characters were in it, obviously, from the franchise, and I think there was like some battle that took place, and I won't say on top of Hogwarts, but like higher up. Like I just remember like this battle scene, and I really don't remember much about the dream at all. Other than, just, yeah, these two siblings in this battle and some characters. I think Draco was like a bigger character in it because I happen to like him as a character. But like, other than that, I really don't remember anything about this dream. I just remember having it. And I think I wrote it down somewhere. I've tried to find it like over and over again. I don't know where it went. It grew legs and walked. I don't know. But it just disappeared. But I do remember, those few particular things about this dream. And so I remember waking up and being like, oh, that'd make a really cool story, whatever it was. And so I used to do NaNoWriMo every year. I really liked it. We had a group in our area. I had some friends, and we would all get together and, write for NaNoWriMo. And if you're not familiar with NaNoWriMo, it's not technically around anymore, but it used to be a nonprofit that was, writing focused, and it was a challenge every November to write 50,000 words, which is the average number of words for a novel. So I would do that every year, just kind of trying to jumpstart my creativity, get myself to like writing again. As I discussed last video, I had that, writing depression that I went through where I just didn't want to look at anything, didn't want to write anything. It was just, gross. I can't even fathom writing something and actually enjoying it. So I had to get out of that. And, over time, I used Nano to try and help with this a little bit. So that year, 9 years ago, just over 9 years ago now, it is 2025, it's December as I, film this. Hello from the past. So in 2017, for NaNoWriMo, I was like, hey, I'll write a story based on this dream that I had. And so I started writing it. It turned out very different than the dream. I only know that because I remember thinking, this is very different than the dream when I was done. I think even when I just went to write out the premise, it just kind of folded into something very, very different from the dream that I really don't remember. But it ended up different. So yay. I'm very grateful for the dream because obviously it jump-started, this story that again, it was something I hadn't really written before. This was about a group of mages, magic users, and I've always had, I write fantasy and I've always written fantasy, so I always had a tinge of magic in the story and everything, but not quite to this level. So, it was very different and fun, and, I just was like, okay, I really like this story, I'm having fun with this, and about halfway through the story that November, I think, somewhere around halfway through, I suddenly realized, wait a minute, this connects with that other story that I put on the shelf, with my vampire story. What? I really wasn't expecting that. And initially, they kind of had a similar vibe to them, and there were, these creatures that popped up in the story that were, basically like vampires, magic-eating vampires kind of thing. So, it made me think of the story, but I didn't realize that they were literally connected until I was, about halfway through or so of that original draft. And then I was like, wait a minute, this character that was in this other story appeared in this story. These are connected. This is a point here. So from then on, I was like, all right, well, it would be really interesting if I could mirror these stories, basically write one version of, the one story and the other version of the other story, and they're not the same people, but they mirror each other really nicely. That was my initial thought for this. And I was going to have, these characters. They were kind of side characters, important but side. But they were going to show up in both stories, and it was going to be, this, again, whole connecting thing. And so, that was my original vision for this. So I ended up finishing that first draft. I say finishing, it was pretty much finished, but it wasn't totally done at the same time. It was kind of inconclusive. So from there on, I actually went and started, writing another draft of it. And I was like, okay, I'm not totally satisfied with this yet. And thus began the 9 years of rewrites and, just writing out details for the story, a very it's fantasy, it's very heavy as far as, like world building, but, you want it to feel natural, of course. So part of that is, really getting in there and being like, okay, how does all this work? What does this all look like? So that you can place it in the story in a way that doesn't feel like, here, I'm just going to info dump you and tell you all this stuff. You want it to feel like it's lived in, like it's real. And in order to do that, you need to know what it looks like. So that took quite some time as well. But at that point, I realized, again, these two stories were connected, but I figured, they were connected in a way that wasn't, literal, I guess you could say. Like, it was a literal connection, but it wasn't like, hey, these two main characters are, completely connected. I was not thinking that at this point. I hadn't gotten to the, Marvel Cinematic Universe thing yet, where they all literally just exist in the same space, and this story feeds into this story. No, it wasn't quite there yet. So at this point, I rewrote the story, and I arrived at a draft I was fairly happy with. I think it was one of my better drafts, because I'll be honest, the story went through a lot of drafts, so many drafts, because again, I was still working through my writing depression, and I was still trying to figure out, how do I write this? Because it wasn't something that I had written before, nothing to that degree. So even loving fantasy, it's just, that was a skill I had to build up, to be able to write something and incorporate all these little details in a way that, felt natural, and just coming up with what are these details in the first place. I had written fantasy beforehand, but it was never that detailed, because it was still more like real world. This is completely alternate world. So back to the draft. I continued writing, continued learning, more about the publishing industry, because at this point I had decided that I wanted to go back to pursuing traditional publishing, which is, where I'm at now still. So I actually was able to finish the draft, and I found it up at a conference that I wanted to go to, and it would be, my, I think, third real conference. I had been to a few conferences before, and talked to some different writers and agents and things, but just really side, just a little bit, not really in depth, not hey, let's have a genuine conversation. So this conference, I was really looking forward to it. And then a little thing called 2020 and the pandemic happened, and so that threw me off slightly. But there's a but, thank you. There's a but. That sounded weird. Sorry. But yes, there was a but. There was a thing that happened. So the conference didn't happen in person, obviously, because pandemic. But they transitioned to having it online. And so I was able to still actually participate, go to the conference. And that was the first time I had ever actually been able to really, really present my work to somebody. I mentioned last video that I had queried, before I started self-publishing. So I'd sent out, letters to agents and, talking about, hey, this is my project and stuff, prior project. But I had never actually met with anybody really, aside from the very brief, just barely interaction at the other conferences. So this was a big deal. I was able to, write my query letter and actually have agents and editors look at my work, at the time, and some of, my chapters and the synopsis and, just all the things. So I got to do things that I hadn't done before. And so that was very nerve-wracking, but also very encouraging, because it was my first time really, really talking to anyone in the industry, face to face, not literally face to face, but, actually talking to somebody, and just kind of gauging what people were like, and, getting different advice and things. And I received some very good feedback, and I was very grateful for that. So from there, I actually went to editing the manuscript again. And, trying to get it, revision, editing, whatever you want to call it. I always call it editing. I know they're technically the same, but different. But anyways, I started editing it. So I wanted to get it, to a better place. And I got some feedback from, the agents and editors and just different things I could try. And so I really went into heavy, like, okay, let's edit this. And then, 6 months later, there was another conference, and it was also virtual, but I got to talk to, people again. I won a pitch award, for my pitch. So that was really exciting because I'd never done a pitch before. I actually was on the phone with the lady. I felt bad for this agent. I was on the phone with the lady, because it was via phone. It wasn't via FaceTime at that, time, or, no Zoom, no anything. So I was on the phone with her, she calls, I answer, and she's like, oh, okay, go ahead. And I'm like, go ahead, what? What? I was like, I told her, I'm going to be honest, I've never done a pitch before. I had written out, kind of basically a synopsis for it, short synopsis kind of pitch, one line, not really one line, but elevator pitch. There we go. That's the term I'm looking for. Elevator pitch. I had written out an elevator pitch, but I'd never done a pitch before. I'd never, been in a place where that was a thing. So I was honest with her. I was like, I've never done a pitch. I'm kind of not really sure. Like, do you just want me to, read off my short synopsis kind of thing? And she's like, yeah, go ahead. And I was like, okay, thank you. So I sat there on the phone and read it out to her and, just told her briefly about the story. And she's like, oh, okay, thank you. And, so we talked a little bit. And then I won, the pitch award. So that was pretty exciting because I was like, I had no idea what I was doing kind of on one hand, I'm just like, I know I'm supposed to talk about, but like, how do I do this? So that was very encouraging. And then after that, I had some notes from there too. And I went back to editing the story, and then I ended up being just satisfied with it in general. I'm just like, this just doesn't feel right. This just doesn't feel right. So I wrote another draft and another draft, and I started another draft, and I spent several years, honestly, writing half drafts or partial drafts, and it never felt right. I could never figure out what the issue with this story was, and just why it wasn't coming together. I was still in that bit of a writing depression. It was getting better, but I still felt like I wasn't capable, as a writer. Like, I wasn't capable as a creative, which is, a lie, of course. There's always going to be lies when you're pursuing, your calling and, what you meant to do. Like, there's always going to be lies trying to stop you. And there definitely was, and there still are, of course, but I've learned a little better now, thank God, literally. But I continued to work and write, through this, and trying to find like what piece I was missing, and, continuing to learn more about the craft and more about publishing. And I started, branching out and learning more about comics and, making, writing for screenplays and just different things that I wanted to incorporate in this, project. Eventually, I had this vision, and it wasn't, from the get-go, it wasn't, what it ended up being, but I still had this vision. And somewhere through writing for those years and, just taking my time with it and just being persistent with it, through I don't really know how many drafts, and I don't really want to count how many drafts, honestly. It's probably somewhere near 20. I don't know. But somewhere through my persistence, it started to become clearer. The more I wrote, the more I thought about it, the more I prayed about it, the story became clearer. And at some point I realized, I think these stories are, my past story, my vampire story, and the mage story, we're just going to call them those. I'm not, giving out names right now. That's a little bit of a trade secret at the moment. But I started to realize more and more that these stories were interconnected. And 2023 came around, and I was like, I pretty much had given up on, the mage story. Like, I just was like, I don't think this is going to happen. I don't think I'm going to be able to write this. I think I'm just going to have to, quit and just put it on the shelf. It's just, I can't handle it anymore. I really want to write it. I want to write it well, and I want to do it. And I love this story, but I just can't love it anymore. I felt like I just couldn't continue. So actually at that point, beginning, I think it was of 2023, I was like, I've got to do something. Like I just want to, be happy with writing again. So I went back and picked up my vampire story and started working on it again. And I just was like, I'm just going to write and just let myself do the thing and, just be creative with it and just have fun and just try and find out what this story wants to say. I was trying really not to think about publishing or, moving with any of that. So I continued working on that throughout 2023. And for the first time, honestly, I felt like a real writer. I mean, that sounds kind of terrible since I've been writing, for a long time, but I think it goes back to that, 20,000 hour thing. Like I had put in the work for years at that point. If you watch the last video, you'll know that I, started writing and finished my first novel when I was 12. So, I'd been writing since then, at least. I had written, some stories before that too, but that was just my first official novel. But I think a lot of it was, stacking up to that so many hours. But also I had refined why I wanted to pursue writing and, why I wanted to write what I wanted to say, just personally, and, build up those skills and really just said, not forget, but basically forget all of the stuff that I've learned about writing up until now, the way I'm supposed to do things. And I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it how I want to do it. I'm going to put it together. I'm going to be creative with it. It was a lot of, I learned the rules, so then I got to break them. And just letting my creativity, can't talk today, creativity push me forward, and letting the vision for this story become clearer, letting God just be like, hey, here, this is the thing, this is what we're doing. And, that was great, because as I started writing that, not only did I feel like I could finally write again, but I came to the point where I realized, these stories do connect, and I'm starting to see what this actually needs to be, where I actually need to go with this. And I was able to see that, hey, all these things that I've been working on, this forever, are all stacking up into this project, which I mentioned, again, last video, how, so many things in life that we do, we don't realize, like we learn from everything that we do, and then we end up using it later on. I was starting to see at this point how everything that I'd learned and been through, even my writing depression, was feeding into this project and making it, better. And the things that I had experienced and come to realize from those projects were things that I could carry forward and that were actually making me stronger now as a writer and as a storyteller. So about, I think, halfway through 2023 or into 2024, I was like, still writing the project and stuff. And I'm like, I think I need to set this aside for now, because I think this actually isn't, the first book in the series. I think it's more like the second one. So I realized, it was the second one. So I actually dusted off my old mage story and was like, okay, I think it's time. I think, this needs to go in here. This needs to be the first book. I need to start writing it again, which was crazy because, beforehand I was like, yeah, it's never going to happen. I'm just giving up. I'm just putting it on the shelf. It's fine. I love you, but no. And it took me a little bit to like really, swallow the fact that no, this story's coming back. We're going to do it in a completely different way, by the way. The basic premise was the same, but, the rest of the story was not, which was very much the case for the vampire story too. When I picked it back up, it was like, basically like the names were the same and the very basic premise was the same and everything else was different. So, the version that I published, or even the other, versions I tried writing a little bit of it in between, so many years later, nothing like what it ended up being. So in 2024, the end of 2024, around Christmas, I think it was actually a few days after Christmas, which is funny because it's almost Christmas now, my Christmas display. But I actually picked up the Mage story and started writing it. I started in a notebook, and I went from writing in that notebook to writing it by hand, or sorry, let's reverse that. I went from writing in the notebook to writing it on the computer. That's the accurate way to say that, to typing it. And I worked on it all throughout 2024 and into 2025. Actually, I think I'm getting my dates mixed up. I don't know. I worked on it. No, I started it in the end of 2024 and worked on it through 2025. Sorry. Math and I are not friends usually, and dates and numbers and all those things. But yes, I worked on it through 2025. And I actually just recently finished the draft, the working draft. I'm going to call it a working draft. That's, usually what I say. So I finally have a draft of this story that feels legitimate and honest and like it needs to be. So I, from here, am going to be editing it and, doing my revision and a bunch of other things that I think I will probably talk about in the next video, when I get, into a little bit about, the editing and, reading through the manuscript. But yes, it's taken a long time and it's been a kind of crazy journey. But I finally figured out how these stories go together and, how this book universe, so to speak, and later on also other things as well. I'm already looking at making a script for it, putting my screenwriting to use. So I finally have a vision for this story, and it took 9 years. And if you count in, the previous draft of the vampire story, it's taken longer than that. So it's definitely been a journey, but I feel like every step of this journey has, led to where I am now, and furthering, towards publication and film and all these things that I finally have a good vision for. So to any writer or, creative or just anybody working on a project, if it's taking lots of time and it feels like it's just taking forever, maybe just change your mindset about it a little bit. I think when I changed my mindset from, oh God, this is taking forever and I'm never going to get there, and, all of those things, to, thinking I want to do my best job, I want it to be what it needs to be. I want to do it justice, right? But I also want to enjoy the process and really learn the lessons that it's trying to teach me too. And, just really absorbing the journey, not just the destination. So this has been episode 2 of Creator's Cut. Thank you for watching. Next episode, I will be talking a little bit about my editing phase. I have not started editing yet. I will be probably towards the beginning of the year, but before that I'm going to be doing a read through and some notes and all the fun things there. I have a little bit of a different outlook on that now, and some different things I'm going to be trying, so I'm probably going to be making a video about that, just some different methods I'm trying for the beginning of the edit. And also I will be making a video, which probably will actually be the next one, about, the end of the year. I always kind of take stock of like, where am I creatively versus, where I was the beginning of the year, and kind of where do I want to go, that sort of thing. So I probably will be making a video about that as well. But I will see you in the next episode, and thank you very much for watching.